Welcome to our discussion about the crown chakra. I will talk a bit about experiences, basically what happens when it is opening up and starts to flow, common blockages, as well as the perspective of the crown chakra. If you have been following along, this is a video in a series of videos that I've been doing on chakras and their consciousness. And I say this, first of all, because you might want to check out in the description the playlist of all the videos in this series, but also because I am talking about the crown chakra opening in a series of stabilizing chakras. So basically, the chakras opening 1 through 7. In simpler terms, sometimes people can have their crown open. This is what is known as a top-down awakening, and not have their lower chakras open. And this is actually extraordinarily common. It's one of the most common types of spiritual awakening. I have a video on that if you are interested in learning more about top-down awakenings. What I am talking about here is what happens when the rest of the chakra system is essentially online and flowing. In my other videos, I talked about a river. What happens when this river, this flow going through our midline, starting at the first chakra, flows completely through our midline and comes to our crown. So I will share a couple of experiences that people have when energy starts, some of that river starts flowing to this chakra. Sometimes people will develop an awareness of this chakra, an awareness of the top of their head, either through a feeling of kind of like sort of energy sort of pinging there, a feeling of energy gathering there. Or there may be an awareness that there is flow going up into the head, but it stops at the third eye. It doesn't go any further. Or there may even be an awareness that the rest of the body feels pretty whole, pretty in flow, but it's almost like the top, the top third of the head is sort of cut off or missing from awareness. So people have different experiences regarding this, kind of depending on their energetic makeup. Some people who are a bit too open may have too much energy coming into the crown, maybe having that top-down awakening, and actually the the skull and the top of the head coming more online can bring it to a nice waterfall of energy instead of like a huge stream of energy. This will make sense for people perhaps who experience things like downloads and channeling and sort of all of that top-down phenomena. But let's take a step back for a moment. We've had this flow go through our midline, go into the center of the head, the sixth chakra, expand, create light, and now it is flowing up to the crown. There are a couple of blockages that are important to talk about. And the first is that we have a series of acupuncture points, or what are known as micro chakras, what we can term most neatly as micro chakras, going into the scalp. And so I will not go too in depth into these, but let's just say that they are kind of a meeting of the third eye and the crown. So they have a lot to do with increasing clarity, increasing ability to see the self and the universe with depth, and sort of the releasing of all of the rest of the beliefs and patterns and illusions um, that keep us from really seeing the world clearly. And so some people will tend to have some energy stuck here, will need to visit this area. There's a good acupuncture point called Do 23, which is like right here, that a lot of acupuncturists use because it tends to clear out the system, clear out the senses really well, both in a physical and a spiritual sense. I will say that the blockages that tend to happen for people, with the exception of one big one I'm going to talk about, tend to be less emotional at this point. They tend to be more physical. And so it is not unusual for people to experience headaches when there is energy flowing up into the crown, um, dizziness, nausea, in part because of the dizziness. Most of us have known that experience of being dizzy and having nausea regards to it. Um, and so it tends to be more of a physical sensation, the crown does, than some of the other chakras, which tend to be a blend of physical and emotional. The other thing that tends to come up for people when the crown is opening is insomnia. It can be pretty brutal. When we think about words, they always kind of have double or even triple meaning when we're talking about words that refer to things like spiritual awakening. So we have enlightenment, which means, not only light, but also the body, the soul, the energy, of the body getting lighter. And then we have this word awake. And there is kind of a cosmic humor, cosmic joke about how when the crown is opening, there tends to again be a shift in sleep, and in dream life, in which dreams stop, dreams that might have been so vivid or realistic, or an understanding that dreaming is just, different um, fields or planes of reality, each as important or significant as waking life, can occur with the third eye and some of the upper chakras. With the crown, it tends to be a bit of a different story, is that a whole lot of insomnia or being awake occurs. And so people who experience their crown chakra opening from, that river flowing up and going through the crown chakra will often report experiences of sleep difficulties for a period of time. And so my best advice for this is that it does kind of suck, if I'm going to be simple about it, but it is just a phase, as in everything is kind of a phase. And to, discover some some good movies, some good meditations, some good new music, some good new books during this time. Um, because what is happening energetically is that that river is not only flowing through the body, but it's starting to flow out of the body when the crown opens. Um, we tend to think of the crown chakra as being, here. But really, if we are talking about that cone of energy, the crown chakra actually opening, it is that river coming up through the third eye, so through the brain, through the midline, and going out through the top of the head and going above the head. So we can consider kind of this whole area to the top of the head to basically be the crown chakra. And so this is an important consideration for a few reasons. Um, the first is that I've talked about in some of my other videos how chakras tend to have front and back aspects. And so what that means in lower chakras is that our solar plexus, um, it'll be, at the end of the rib cage in the back, and in the front, it'll be at the end of the rib cage, and then we'll be, essentially um, right back and front with one another, kind of on that horizontal plane, so to speak. As I've talked about, the third eye is a little bit different. It has a little bit of an angle, but the crown chakra is different as well, because when it opens, we can consider this to be the front of the chakra, energy coming through that river, flowing up and through the head. And then the back of the chakra is the first chakra. And so what is happening is a major transition in consciousness, a major transition within the body, because for most of the awakening experience, it has been a river flowing through the physical structure. When we get to the crown and it opens, it is going out of the physical structure and connecting us to more fully to divinity, to whatever our spiritual conceptualization of divinity is, connecting us to light, connecting us to, all of that sort of stuff I talked about in the third chakra video. But we can consider it, for simplicity, I will just refer to it as connection to the divine. And so this can be disorienting for the energy system, because we naturally have all of our chakras present, have all of the energy structures in what we may term the aura or the area around us present. But it's really a question of if they are dormant or active or not. I talked about in my energy work video, what is energy work? Does something have nice flow going through it, or is it stuck? Is it blocked? Is it offline? Is it, kind of dormant? And for most people, their crown chakra is either going to be blocked or dormant or sort of offline, even if they are somebody who has had a top-down awakening, because having energy come upwards and flow up through the system is a lot different than just having a lot of energy basically kind of stuck right here that doesn't really have the ability to integrate with the energy system, with your body, with your life, with your, intellect, um, that well. When things remain up here, they don't become embodied. They sort of remain abstract. And so, like I mentioned, there can be some really physical side effects, lack of sleep, dizziness, nausea, because the system is opening up not only through the crown, but also through the first chakra, the back aspect of the crown chakra. And so there will be a flow going, that river going, not only through the body, but extending above the head and around the body, and also extending from the first chakra, flowing downward between the legs into the earth. And this eventually creates what we may term, or different people have termed, kind of a body of light or a rainbow body, or, kind of all these sort of things that kind of mean the same thing. And it just basically means that eventually that these structures start opening up and flowing like a river around you, in and around you, and that eventually um, there is the possibility of having that flow go through every organ, every body, every cell, every tissue of your body. And so somebody can have their crown chakra open and experience a bit of this flow, a bit of light, and not have that light go to every cell in their body or every sort of, energy structure around them, fill their aura, fill their kind of head with light, the area around it, fully go into the earth. Um, but from this point forward, when the system can register and recognize the crown chakra as being open and can experience flow through there, it will be working on that process. I will talk in a future video about the spiritual heart, which is my last video in this series. So that will be the next video. Because what you will find is that some spiritual paths consider breaking through the crown chakra, having that whole pillar of light flow through you, as to be the end of the spiritual path. And some people, like myself, consider that energy flowing into the body, energy flowing from the heart or from the structure that we would know as the spiritual heart, to be the ultimate sort of termination point, the ultimate sort of goal um, of awakening. So there are a couple of emotional or, kind of beliefs, um, energies that need to sort of dissolve, or that tend to block people from energy flowing through the crown chakra. Um, it is in some ways more difficult to talk about the upper chakras because you start going into things that really need to be felt. For example, if I were to talk about how there can be a real recognition of impermanence when going through the crown chakra, some of you may be like, oh, great, I'm already aware of that. But recognizing it on a bodily level, recognizing that we are humans and our nature has changed, that we are only in human bodies for so long, really connecting to the divine and that impermanence means seeing more and more that the individual self, the I that people talk about, is a tiny drop in the ocean, that humanity, we tend to have very human-centric thoughts, and that tends to break apart as we experience the crown opening more and more, and we experience the divine sort of pouring through us, and our energy extending much further past our human bodies. There can be some considerable, what we may term, ego disillusion here. And so a lot of the things that I would talk about with the crown chakra very much have to do with disillusion of ideas or thoughts that you may not have understood, form kind of a core philosophy or baseline of our existence. One of them is that human-centric thought I'm talking about. That is kind of a good litmus test for awakening. Does somebody consider their individual self to be, kind of main character syndrome? That would be for chakra. If they're moving through to third, there might be questions about humanity, and going into the heart as well, about how humanity certainly does some difficult and what we may term toxic things, and awareness of humanity's impact on the other. Um, but as we go into the upper chakras, especially when we resolve our fear and reactions to our own physical death, we can recognize that infinity is a very large place, and that our moment in time, our moment of existence, is a very, very small thing, and an increasingly small thing. Um, the more we awaken. And so people sometimes do have difficulties with this, but the best way I can relate it, and I talked about this in the Spiritual Awakening Guide, is someone lying on the grass or sitting and looking at the stars at night. On a nice clear night, you become aware of this same type of insignificance, this same type of recognition that humanity or the concept of an individual self is really just um, a small bit, a small sort of speck in what may be determined to be eternity, or sort of the entire ocean of what we may consider to be the cosmos or divinity. An interesting thing happens, though, that the more that we sort of move into or open our crown chakra and experience this sort of flow in which we are less and less significant, in which we become, kind of a single web and a single thread in a weaving, or even a part of a single thread in a huge weaving, is that we start to come into this idea of cosmic wholeness as well. This understanding that we may be this tiny speck of this whole, this tiny drop in the ocean. Yes, more ocean metaphors. I'm not the first person to utilize them for good reason. But that we are the entirety of the cosmos itself. And again, while I'm saying this, I heard this and I sort of intellectually absorbed it a great deal before I experienced it, because the experience of it is flow moving through you, is that experiencing yourself as that ocean and as that drop in the ocean is at the same exact time. And this is a paradox. It is something that really needs to be felt, to be experienced. But there is an interesting thing that happens when the third eye and the crown really start to open. And that is, for most of our spiritual path, most of us need to really cut down on our ego, is to, heal the trauma we've experienced, heal the pain, kind of come out of that victim mode, come out of that feeling of ourselves as, kind of the protagonist of our play, and everybody else is like kind of side characters and that sort of stuff. Into recognizing that we are, all sort of part of the play of consciousness of the cosmos, sort of thing. One of the things that some people can really struggle with at this point is the recognition of their divinity, their specialness. And it's interesting because at the third chakra, I talked about people who tend to be stuck in that superiority inferiority loop, kind of, the Dunning-Kruger aspect of things for simplicity, where people believe they are much further on their spiritual path than they are, that kind of because of basic wounds, basic soul wounds, need to exert themselves as special and superior, and all of that sort of stuff. um, there is a lot of humor in people being like, well, I don't have an ego, so I'm better than you. That sort of sentiment, which has been repeated to me a number of times over the last 5 to 10 years or something like that. And my response to that is kind of, a very kindly sort of, if you don't have an ego anymore, maybe that is something that you should develop if you didn't get the chance to develop it in childhood. Or the question may be a little bit of a still kindly, but a little bit more harsh, of, if you don't have an ego anymore, what is suffering? Like, why are you still suffering, sort of thing. Um, but people going into the third eye and crown opening may have difficulty recognizing how special they are, how divine they are, how significant they are. And it's funny because people at earlier stages of the path may need to like maybe grasping towards this because of really basic wounds, you know. We cannot be as we are because we feel we are worthless or unlovable, and so we need to be special and significant. This is different. This is recognizing how special and significant and loved when we drop down into the spiritual heart, how we are absolutely connected to absolutely everything. And that there are very few people that authentically get to this place, and that it comes from a significant amount of work. It comes from a significant amount of self-worth work. It comes from a significant amount of self-inquiry, of being willing to sort of go through that process of digging through the dark aspects of self until there's light. Um, so not a journey for the faint of heart. I do find it's interesting that sometimes people present awakening as like this single moment. Oh, this person, you know, maybe they had some past life stuff before, or, maybe just all of a sudden they, um, in an instant, like a light bulb flashing, like, or a light switch going off, they were enlightened. And what I notice most about this is that people tend to say this when they are at really low points. So I was really depressed, I was really despairing, and then they felt an alleviation of that, and they consider that to be enlightenment or awakening. And on some level, it certainly can be. People have religious awakenings all the time when they're, flat out addicts and stuff like that that are authentic and true and wonderful. In some cases, it is sort of like if you've been in an immense amount of pain and that pain suddenly alleviates and you feel almost euphoric. Um, in some cases, what people are experiencing in the modern world is complete spiritual disconnection, disassociation, um, and they're considering that some type of enlightenment, which really says a lot about our modern culture. But even if we have an experience in which we have a sudden awakening, in which that river flows all the way through the crown, that may be creating a roadmap, or if it is creating that full flow, there still is a need for integration and processing. So if somebody truly does go from being in a first chakra consciousness to have that river permanently flow through their chakra system, experiencing that light, that opening through the crown permanently. Um, it first of all like won't dry up again, it won't like go back down again, it will be permanent. But also that would need an incredible amount of integration and processing time. That is, makes a lot of stories about, um, awakening and enlightenment a whole lot less, sexy, I guess. One of my favorite experiencers is St. John of the Cross. Um, and Irina Tweedy's book, in which a lot of people hate that book because it's diary, because it is 700 pages talking about her Kundalini awakening in terms of a Sufi context. But it really shows the sort of daily grind of awakening, the repeated sort of experiences and all that sort of stuff that people go through while awakening. Basically, it takes a great degree of work, even if you've had past lives or whatever your thoughts are regarding yourself. Something that people don't want to consider. So Like I said, one of the things that people have difficulty shifting into, especially as particular type of personality, but really all of us. So I'll talk about the particular type of personality. That personality was somebody who was maybe more stuck in imposter syndrome. They were taught that they were only valued if they were could provide some type of worth to the people around them. If they could only be of use to the people around them, kind of suffer from poor self-esteem, can't accept compliments. We're in a family structure where they were kind of the black sheep or the scapegoat. Those people kind of have a foot up in terms of the third chakra because they're like, okay, yeah, I'm not superior to anyone. Like, let's move on. Um, but in this chakra, they can get quite stuck because the idea that they have run that triathlon or have completed that triathlon, that they are special, that they are loved, that they are connected, that they are truly worthwhile. Not only seeing that as sort of like a, meme or an intellectual abstraction, but opening themselves to feeling it, to truly feeling held by divinity, to truly experiencing grace, to truly feeling connected on a spiritual level continually. There may be some issues with self-worth that still arise, or if not self-worth, the thought of who am I to have this sort of experience. The difficult emotional thing that tends to come up for people with this chakra is a feeling of abandonment and loneliness. And this is a very first chakra thing. And in my book, The Spiritual Awakening Guide, I talk about it as the destroyer because that's a good conceptualization. It always helps when we can kind of personify something. Um, but this can be kind of the base aspects of our being, the parts of ourselves that still don't feel worthy or lovable and that sort of stuff. But the kind of what remains in our first chakra that prevents it from opening. And in energy work, we have a very what is above is what is below, what is below is what is below, above. And so some people may be surprised that they are working with their first chakra when they kind of get to the crown. But the first chakra can prevent the crown from opening, the crown can prevent the first chakra from opening, vice versa. Um, is this essential a loneliness that we all experience kind of at the base level of our being, this essential sort of disconnection, existential despair. Um, and this is a very spiritual thing. Ultimately, we are talking about a feeling of being abandoned or separated from divinity, from God or goddess, whatever you may want to term it. Um, and we feel this at other points in our path, and we don't recognize that sort of spiritual poverty that is there. On some level, we do, because otherwise we wouldn't be spiritually searching and, taking workshops and looking at videos like this and, all that sort of stuff. But having it sort of come out front and center is a difficult experience because experiencing that spiritual abandonment and all of the emotions that can come with it can certainly be something that can be difficult to navigate. But if we are willing to feel and experience those emotions and, um, recognize them as part of the path, recognize the sort of dark stuff that is coming up as simply stuff that is preventing the crown and the first chakra from fully opening the front and the back. That sort of pillar of light that's preventing that pillar of light from extending outside of our body. We can resolve it just like we resolve anything else. And what happens is an essential connection, in greater and greater ways to spirit, to the divine, to that sense of flow. Um, and at this point, that flow can go through us, can flow through the crown, can flow in all sorts of directions, can flow around the body into the aura and all that sort of stuff. Um, the last thing that I will mention is that when people open up the crown chakra, they enter into what is known as the voids. I talk about these in my shamanic workbooks because they are planes of existence that can be visited. But essentially, we go back to that primordial symbol of the yin yang symbol. We have a void that is essentially a light void that is like a blank sheet of paper. Um, and then we have a dark void, same thing, dark, sheet of paper. And the further we go into that light, the further we go into that dark, um, the more our sense of self lessens, the more we go into absorption states or being absorbed by that light, being absorbed by that darkness. And I will say that this is far beyond considering light good, dark bad. Um, but what happens when we enter into those voids, when we truly experience them, is that they are magnificent healing places. I go into the voids a lot for my work, my client work as well as personal work. But that dark and light ultimately combine. They start definitely doing this in the third chakra. If we look at our energetic anatomy, we have the midline, and then we have Ida and Pingala, this sort of, what looks like a double helix if you're familiar with genetics, but essentially that those two twisting snakes that come up, and they come and gather into the third eye area, at which point they combine and go out, kind of dissolve into the crown. And at that point, this concept of masculine versus feminine, dark versus light, all of these sorts of things, that this versus that I talked about in the last video, um, further dissolve, further release, further let go. I find it interesting. I will say one last thing regarding Kundalini awakening. A lot of times people conceptualize Kundalini as a goddess. And rightfully so, it is the feminine, so the feminine polarity for second chakra, opening up, flowing, rising to meet the masculine polarity, essentially the head. But the eventual outcome of awakening is that there is no longer distinction between those things. We are all those things and the space in between. We are no longer masculine versus feminine, light versus dark. We are one whole integrated whole. We are light and dark simultaneously. They feed into one another. They are the same thing. One of the first days of acupuncture school, you learn all of these principles of yin and yang. They interrelate. Um, they create one another. And all of this sort of lovely stuff. But it all points to this essential truth that if we go into this place of disillusion, into this place where we allow for this flow to go through our crown and outside of our body, is that we experience what are known as absorption states. So again, going into states that are blissful, peaceful, into the voids, into states of being that totally can, move us further and further into recognition of infinity and recognition of who we are individually, simultaneously, separation, individuation, and absorption, um, complete connection at the same time. So I will leave things there. I will do one last video on the spiritual heart because I find that the spiritual heart is the basis of creation. It is what opens up last. And so I hope you've enjoyed this series. I hope you've gotten something out of this video. And if you are experiencing some of this stuff, know that you are not alone. And one of the things that can be enormously helpful for people at this state, especially people that are still suffering, is to look at what within them still feels disconnected, what feels disconnected from the divine in this state, in the upper chakras, what in them feels disconnected from nature. Those sort of questions will reveal the sort of blockages and areas for healing that are necessary to reconnect to the divine, to feel oneself as, kind of that, as the ocean and that drop of ocean at the same time.